Good afternoon. This is Julie Hudeman. Welcome to the webinar, Writing Effective Survey Questions. I am the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator for Purdue Extension. We also have Alva Muhammad on the line, who's coordinating with me here. She'll be managing the chat box and any other issues that are revolved around the webinar itself today. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get started. The plan today is to present for 20 minutes. And then after that time, we'll open up the line and let you ask questions or comments. As we go along, if there are questions that come up and you'd like to put them into the chat box, that would be great. So go ahead and please do that. So my presentation today in talking about survey questions is going to focus on these 6 aspects of writing the survey questions. I'm going to talk about the fit, how well the questions fit to a program. I'm going to talk about the concept of a question and the focus on one concept at a time. I'm going to talk about the words that you use when you state a question for a survey. I'm going to look at the balance of questions on a survey and how those are coordinated. We're going to talk about the perspective of the question and how you write them in the perspective of the participant. And we're going to talk about the responses, because the question is one thing, but the responses also are part of that, and it's very important. So how am I going to do that today? I'm going to do it 2 different ways. I'm going to show you examples of some survey questions. Some of you on the line here today may actually recognize some of them. As Alva and I have worked with many of you on evaluation projects, we're going to be using some of those current questions as examples of how questions might be worded or posed in a survey. So you may see that. Also, I'm going to ask you to respond. I have a few slides that I call "What do you think?" And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, and I'd like you to type quickly into the chat what your ideas might be. Alva's going to quickly kind of summarize the thoughts that come in, and then we'll move on. But I'd like you to open up your chat box. You make sure you have that at your fingertips as we get into that, so that you can take part in this conversation. Again, we'll do 20 minutes here, and then we'll open up the line for us to talk as we go forward. So the first concept to talk about is fit. It's important that the questions that you design for your survey fit your program that you're doing and the evaluation plan that you have. So for your extension program, we need to know these kinds of things to make sure our fit is good. You need to know the audience. What is the audience like? Do you have youth? Do you have adults? Do you have a certain target population? Whatever that might be. We need to look at your curriculum and what are the materials or the activities you're planning for that event, and what are the objectives? What is it you are working to teach the learners? What are your learner objectives? That's important to the structure of your program. It really guides how you write your questions. You also want to take a look at your evaluation plan. What is the reason you are evaluating? Are you evaluating for improvement? Like the next time you give this program, are you looking to do it a little bit better? Are you looking to measure how effective it is? How did the people actually learn something that you were teaching? How effective was it? Are you trying to measure those outcomes that we are reaching for in extension? Or are you trying to measure the impact of what's happening for the people that participate? That structure determines how you write your question. So here is an example. For a youth audience, you use very, very simple questions and you give them few responses. We're typically used to a Likert scale or a scale question that has 4 or 5, maybe more kinds of responses. When you're working with youth, you have fewer than that. Yes and no questions are great, and just a few responses is probably best for a youth audience. This is from 4-H Common Measures. In an adult audience, you need to give them a recognition or credit for having had some experience and knowledge coming into the situation. As you know, with adult learners, we have to recognize that they're not an empty slate. They have a lot of experience that can help influence what they know and what they can experience. So it's important to give them credit in how you write the questions, Multiple choice, scaled responses work well with this group, and you can go 5 or more responses. In this case, the question says, I learned something I didn't know before. So again, you're recognizing that adults come to the situation and have some background already. Maybe not exactly in what you're teaching, but they have a lot of life experience that can contribute to their ability to know what's going on with the situation. The other aspect that you look at are your outcomes. This is what you use to focus your questions. How many people have filled out a survey and said, whoa, this is way too long, I don't want to fill it all out? Well, that's important to focus on the things that are most important, and your outcome list helps you do that. You look at your outcomes and say, which of these are part of my program, and how can I write a question to get at that outcome? This is a sample of the outcomes from the DFFS logic model. The other part you look at is your curriculum. Here's a sample from the Urban Ag Certificate Program, part of the curriculum materials showing the 4th module that they teach and the learner outcomes of that, or the learner objectives of that. So we identify the key concepts that are being taught there in the bottom of the scale, and then we map them to the outcomes. And this tells us how to write our questions, or what to write the questions about. So we use this structure to help determine the questions we need to ask. So you write your question, and it needs to match up with that content from your curriculum or your program or your learner objectives and the outcome or the logic model basis of the structure. So here we have on the left, the outcome is 1.1 from the DFFS logic model, the number of stakeholders who learn about, right? And so on the right, you see that the content is from section 4 of the Urban Ag Certificate Program. And on the bottom, on the left side of that particular one, you have the content listed here. And then you're asking them what they learned about it. So you're getting the answers to this outcome by the way you ask the question. So they're going to tell you if they learned something about this content as it applies to diversified farming and so on. Here's one example. The other thing that you might do is you might look specifically at program effectiveness, outcome, and impact. So, did they learn something? Do they intend to change behavior or take an action or try a skill that they learned? Did they, and after some time, did they actually change behavior? Did you take that action? And what's the impact? How did they benefit from this particular program? What were the results? How did the knowledge they gained and so on affect them? We want to get to that level if we're talking about an evaluation. So here are some examples as we go along. So here's a knowledge. Multiple choice question, you're used to this, right? When you take a test, you often answer lots of questions. Multiple choice is a great way to look at questions and say, did they learn something? If I ask them a question about knowledge, can they answer it correctly? That's one approach to writing your questions to figure out their knowledge. Their yes or no questions are much more simple and could be used too. I learned information that I will share with others. So yes or no, or prefer not to answer. This is from the Local Food Summits. So these are examples of how you ask people about what they have learned to see what they got out of the course that you taught. Another approach you can do is post-pre. This is at the end of the workshop or event. You ask them what they learned before, and you ask them what they learned after. The content is the same, and then you have the same scale. So they can tell you when they started and afterward how much they have learned. So that's a good way to ask about knowledge. You can also do things where you ask knowledge and then you move into if they intend to apply the skill that they're learning. So here's an example from Field Crops IPM. It says, I better understand the use of pesticides. And here's a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. This is another way to ask people how much they know from the lesson that you taught them. And here we're moving into intention. I will use pesticides with multiple sites of action. So they're indicating whether or not they do this, and they're indicating their level of agreement. This is another way to capture their knowledge that you're looking at based on their participation in the program. You can also look at their intentions to change, and here's a yes-no situation. So in this soil health effort, the management changes that were taught are listed on the left. And they can determine yes or no, or they're not sure, or they already are doing this. Again, remember, we have adults that maybe already practice some of these things, and we don't want to assume they don't know anything or don't already do anything. So it's nice to have that level when you ask them what they know. So here's another example of how you might capture their knowledge. Here's the intention to change. So here's an example from Beginning Farmers. Did this program help you to make a decision about becoming a farmer? Yes, no. After participating, do you intend to begin or continue farming? So we're asking about the actions they hope to do in the future. And here's another way to put the yes, no answers. You give them credit for partially doing a skill or task. Remember, behavior change is hard, and adopting something new takes a little bit of work. So do they plan to? In the next year, maybe if they plan to, but they're not sure when. Here, I plan to continue, and so on. So you also can recognize that they can work toward that skill without having to fully do it. This is a good way also to give them credit for what they're trying to do. Here's another one, actions taken. This is after the fact. So maybe some time has passed since your program and you're asking them what actions they've taken. And here's one from Beginning Farmers that says, I now have a farm management plan for my farm. Yes, I've completed one, or yes, I've started a farm management, or no, that kind of thing. So these are indicating what action they've taken in their particular organization or operation. Good way to capture their actions they've taken. Here's one from Beekeeping Workshops, and this is kind of a hybrid. It has a list of actions in it, but the thing that is added to this one is it has some impact questions too. Increased honey sales is a result of taking this action. They've saved money on their hive management by taking some of these actions. So we're getting at how did they benefit from the actions that they have taken. So this list kind of combines actions, but it also inserts some of those impacts that we're looking for in the long run. So this is a good way to say, have you taken action, and what has been the result for you? How did that action affect your operation, and so on? So this is a good way to put the question. Here's one more about impact. How helpful were the recommended practices you adopted? And you can tell at a scale how helpful that was, from not to extremely. And then what were the results? Here we are getting at the impact. Of the recommended practices? And they can select all they apply: increased yields, reduced input, etc. So you're giving them the kinds of things you would expect may happen if they adopt the practices that you taught them. So I've now finished the examples that are talking about the structure of the program and looking at the knowledge gain, looking at the intention to take an action, the changes in behavior, and so on. Now I'm looking at how you might ask questions that have to do with program improvement. The focus on program improvement is about the program itself. You know, what aspects of the program do participants find valuable? Are there things they didn't really care about when any of the activities you had planned, and so on? And can you make a decision about next time you do this program? Can you make some changes based on what they tell you? So here's an example from Urban Ag that you can rate each of the activities they did during the course, and they can tell you how useful they are. If you've got a score from your participants that all say this was useless, then you know maybe my curriculum needs to be adapted a bit. So this is intended to look at how the program works for you. Here's one that would say, what would you say was most beneficial? So the participants can tell you which of most value of the program that you provided for them. All right. So that was my structure about how you look at the effectiveness, how you look at improvement, and so on for the structure of the questions that you ask. Here are a few other tips I'd like to talk about. One is the fact that when you have a question, it should have one concept. So one concept equals one question. It's very common for people to say, oh, I'm trying to keep my survey very, very short, so I have 3 things I want to ask them, so I'm going to cram all those questions into one, then I'll make it nice and short. Or sometimes people start out asking a question, but they're not quite sure what they're asking, so they ask 3 or 4 questions, and they just hope that the participants gives them something they can use, right, or might be helpful to them. So here's an example at the bottom. Did you submit your community development grant proposal? Did it get funded? How much was the grant? What were the funds for? So I have 3 questions in one, and I've left an open-ended box there for them to tell me what they think. We're asking them lots of things there. We probably want to sort that out better and separate it into separate concepts. So try not to get into the habit of lumping lots of things together in a question. One concept for one question. So it's your turn. Get your chat box opened up there. I'm going to give you a sample. Here's a question that could be improved some. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Read this question and let's see. It says, please indicate your level of understanding for each of the concepts covered in the Farming Today module and how comfortable you are applying them to your operation. And so there would be a list of things. The first one is startup expenses, and the scale is low, medium, high. The next concept is the estimated annual operating budget, low, medium, high. Do you think we could improve that question? How might we improve this question? 30 seconds, and then Alva, as soon as you start seeing some chat comments in the box there, please go ahead and share them.
Okay, I've got one question asking two things, needs two questions.
Yep, good. Any other comments? Okay, you're right. It's two different things. You need to have two questions. So here's how we might sort that out. Please indicate your level of understanding and answer that scale. And number two, how comfortable are you applying those, right? So good job. That's what we're looking at. One idea per question. Let's talk about the words that you use. Use simple words and few words is the concept here. Simplify the language in your questions. Maybe you write out a question, but then you look back at it and say, can I simplify the words that I'm using? As easy as the word use versus utilize, or get versus receive. And there are many other examples of this, but look back at the words you're using and see if you can use more simple language. The second thing is you might use a stem. So instead of repeating something on your survey, you might have a stem like this as a result of attending the workshop, and then the remaining list things have that same stem, and then you can go from there. Yes, no. Shorten your sentence. Shorten, shorten, shorten. Whatever you write in a survey, go back and shorten it. Go back again and shorten it again. Go back again and shorten it. Our surveys are too long. The sentences and the questions that we use have to be short. All right, what do you think? Here's a question or a comment or a statement for you. Think about the course concepts listed below and indicate if you have learned anything new about each one. How would you fix that? How would you make that a better question so it's not so long, not so wordy, not so complicated? Do you have anything in the chat, Alva?
Not yet.
How would we fix that statement to have them respond? So the idea, there's going to be a list below it and they would be responding to the list. I just didn't provide that with you. How would you improve this? Okay, I'm going to go on. Here we go.
We have an answer.
That one? Oh, go ahead. How would you fix this?
As a result of attending the blah, blah, blah.
Yep. You could have a stem that kind of sets it up. Yes, that's correct. That would be a good way to do it. And then the list of items would be below that. That would work. That can get you started. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Okay, here's how I would do it. Read the concepts and choose yes or no to what you learned. See how simple you can bring the language back and get rid of extra words. Try to look for that. We tend to be too wordy when we sit down and write a question. All right, one more time. How well do you feel like you have grasped the information from today's workshop? I learned a lot, I learned some, I didn't learn very much, I didn't learn anything. How would you fix that?
Okay, we've got list the concepts, then show response options.
I'm not sure we're on the right track there on that one. Let's try another response. Not quite there. How would you simplify this to find out what they've learned? Anybody else? Okay, let's move on. This is what I would do. Rate how much you learned. A lot, some, not much, none. See the difference? A lot fewer words, a lot more simple words. A lot of reduced reading for the person filling it out. Another thing we need to talk about is balance and coordination. We need to balance between close-ended and open-ended questions. Open-ended is the qualitative kind of data you collect. What changes will you make, and let them respond. Closed-ended means you give them responses they choose from, right? Select all that apply, or maybe they select one answer. But the difference is you have open-ended or you have closed-ended kinds of questions that you ask. The key is that most of the questions on your survey need to be closed-ended and very few open-ended. Here's a survey that looks like something that you might fill out. And here's another survey that you might fill out. What would you prefer to fill out? On the left, we see lots of quantitative or closed-ended questions and one open-ended question at the end. And on the right, we see at least 3 boxes for filling in text plus an additional box. What do you think? Too much open-ended, people don't want to fill all that out. Balance it out by having more quantitative than you have qualitative questions. You can also pair your closed and open-ended questions, but again, be very selective. Just because you can pair them doesn't mean you always have to pair them. Pick the most important question that you want this. For example, in a yes/no question, since attending the conference, have you shared relevant information with others? And then if yes, what information did you share? So you're pairing the open-ended with the closed-ended, and you get a little bit more detail about that. You can count how many people said yes, you can count how many people said no, and you've got a quantitative number to talk about, but then you have some qualitative responses to help you tell what that means. But you limit that. Here's another example of a paired question. You have the concepts on the left here. What did they, and this is whether they plan to apply it. These are the concepts that were taught, and they said if they plan to apply them, yes, no, uncertain. And then down here at the bottom, what did you learn that you will apply to your project? So they're learning, telling us about the content and then talking about what they applied. Another good approach. So here's one. What program do you participate in? And then tell us the kinds of activities you did while you were there. So this is a way to pair quantitative and qualitative or closed and open-ended questions. The other thing we want to talk about is perspective. You want to ask your questions from the participant's perspective. Too often, if you read a survey and all you're reading about is whoever's writing the survey, that's probably not the best approach. You want to put it in their language. So you use your, or you use I. Here are some examples. Have you adopted new business, and so on. No, I have not, or I am thinking I have. So you want to put it in the participant's words, you or I, as examples here, and not in your own words. Here's examples from co-parenting. In the 3 months since, there's a stem, and then each sentence after it starts, I helped, I searched, I used, I stopped, and so on. So it's putting in the words of the participant, and they can respond to that. Here's another one. Since attending food safety session, have you taken these steps? I reviewed, I have taken, right? And so you're putting it in their words, and there's a paired one that goes with an open-ended question after that. So this is a good way to do that. Here's another example of putting it in the participant's perspective. We're asking them about their knowledge on these topics on the left, brain science, negative impacts on, and on the right, the choices are, I'm an expert, I have considerable knowledge, I have some, I have no. So you're putting it in their words, that helps. Also, responses are important to the question. You need to be intentional about the question you ask, and then you need to think about how the participant responds. How do you need them to respond? What kind of information do you need from them in your evaluation? So could they answer with a multiple choice and that give you what you need? A yes/no scale or open-ended and so on. If you want them to give you one answer, or are you letting them give you multiple answers so they can check all that apply? Think about what it is you need to know from them as you write the question, and then figure out the response that they're going to be able to give you. It works best to group your responses together. So if you're doing strongly disagree to strongly agree, and you have other questions that are yes, no, you probably want to group the strongly disagree questions together. And you want to group the yes, no questions together. It's a little bit confusing if you go back and forth on scales like that. So try to keep thinking about whatever type of response you have, but kind of group them together. And finally, the response options need to be mutually exclusive. A person, if you're looking for them to respond in one place, you can't have questions or responses that overlap. Here you go. Here's your chance. Here's a question. Have you started a volunteer leadership position in your community? And it's an open-ended question. What's wrong with this? How might you improve it? What do you think?
We have an answer that is not a closed-ended question. Change to yes or no.
Right, it's a yes, the question is worded as yes or no, right? So the response should be yes or no instead of open-ended. Very good. So maybe we want two questions here. Have you started a volunteer leadership? Yes or no? And if yes, describe it. So maybe that's what they really wanted to say, but they put the question into one. Here's another. What do you think of this one?
No answer so far, Julie.
Answers, the clue is that your responses have to be mutually exclusive. Now, what do you think is wrong with this one?
We haven't answered too many options.
The options are okay. There's something about how they're written. What if I was a person who farmed 100 acres? Where would I put my answer?
There are the same numbers in the choices.
Yes, these are not mutually exclusive. If I were going to put 100 acres in there, I could put it in two different places, and you don't want people to do that. This is what it should look like. So when you have a scale like this or a response like this, you want the 50 or less to be that number, but then 51 to 100, 101 to 500, 501. So the answers don't overlap. That's very confusing for a participant, and it gives you bad data to work with.
So,
all right, so here I am at the end.
Sorry, can we go back to that last one? Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So what if, on this one it says 50 or less, 51 to 100, 101 to 500, 501 to 1,000. Why don't we keep going, like 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000? Why do we stop at over 1,000?
So it depends upon your audience and the program that you're working with. So is the audience that you're working with primarily smaller scale acreage, or are they larger scale acreage? So that's a decision you determine based on your audience. What would be the most appropriate units of acreage to go from there?
So if we were working maybe with a lot of commercial growers, we may say 500 or less, and then 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, up from there.
Yeah, you would adjust that scale, if you will, to your audience and who's attending, right? And what their experience is. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I've talked about the fit of your questions to your program and to your plan. I've talked about one concept with one question, using very simple and few words, balancing your closed and open-ended questions, using the participant perspective, and making sure we focus on the responses and how they relate to the question and they match that question. So this concludes my portion of my presentation. We do have resources for you on the hub. In the evaluation training and resources section there, you will find a recording of today's session in next week or so. I also will be posting my slides there if you want to go back and see all the examples and things that I provided. I also want to direct you to the extension metrics in that same section. And if you're using demographic questions, we have them all ready for you. We have a paper version or we have a Qualtrics version, and we have an extension library that you can use for your surveys. So lots of resources available to you. Alva and I are available to you at evaluation@purdue.edu. I will stop there. Thanks for attending, and we'll open the line for questions.